My name's Paul Kelly. I'm from DA. I'm here to have a talk with you today about the GCC traveller, and in specific the Arabic traveller from the Gulf markets. So if you're interested in outbound travel, or you're in a travel platform, booking platform, those types of things, we're going to take you through some of our insight from our recent travel study. And there's a lot of reasons why the GCC traveller we want to understand them better, and mostly there's about 87.5 billion reasons for that. That's the estimated outbound spend by 2027 of the major markets inside the Gulf Cooperative Council, being Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. So a huge amount of spend, and when we look at those countries, what they're going to be doing in 2027 is spending about 28 billion from Saudi, 30 billion from the UAE, 13 billion from Qatar, and you can already start to see with Qatar and Kuwait, we're starting to see relatively small populations spending a lot of money. And this is going to be a huge driver of not only in-market, not only destinations, but also in-market. Those people need to book flights, they need to book hotels, they also need to book their experiences. With that in mind, I'm going to take you through who the GCC traveller is and basically give you some insight into who they are and how you can better reach them and also understand them a little bit better. So our talk today is the who, what, where, why, there's a couple of W's missing in there, of the GCC traveller in 2022. And firstly, I'll just talk to you a little bit about the who and the how of our report. Firstly, DA, we are a consumer intelligence agency. We run a platform called Scylla, and our platform has been developed here to be Arabic native AI-enabled consumer intelligence. What we do through this is we ingest multiple data sources online, whether that's from social media or the internet. We then process them within Scylla Arabic native, and then we're able to sort of understand a lot of different insights. So we form panels of audiences. Those audiences are then segmented. We then begin to understand their language, behaviour, motives, attitudes. We then undertake some network analysis of those people, and then it's enabled us to sort of get a better insight to who they are and how they operate. Basically, our study is what we consider to be, based on our research, the largest ever study of an Arabic-speaking travelling audience in the GCC. And it's really a window into a valuable world, because in 2019, obviously pre-pandemic, when we were all still somewhat normal, let's say, we had 620,000 travel intent conversations. These are intent to travel, so people wanting to travel, wanting to go places, wanting to do things, wanting to explore, whatever that is, that intent was there. And that was 455,000 unique people. The year of the pandemic, that conversation went up to 780,000. So growth in the year when we couldn't do it. And then we also had 2021, a significant growth coming out of that. So we had 1.3 million intent conversations from 1.1 million people. So basically what we've looked at over the last 3 years is 2.2 million travellers in the GCC to understand. And that's the baseline of what we're going to talk to you today about. So basically as well, just to cover the geographies, the geographic split of what I'm taking you through roughly mirrors the population of the Gulf countries, which is about 40%, 43 to 45% Saudi, 26 UAE, and the rest made up of the others. Roughly following the splits of population, obviously, or spend, not including Oman there. Demographics that we looked at as well largely rest within the 31 to 50 age group. That's largely, as you would expect, the economic decisions are being made by that audience. But the youth segment is increasingly growing, and the split between genders that we looked at was 60-40. So, onto the headlines. Not a crazy statement. Travel's enormously symbolic. But what is it symbolic of? And the interesting thing is how things are growing, and it's the symbolic of the freedoms that we missed, and the GCC traveller is no different. So the light blue area at the bottom of the screen here that you can see is the intent. So this is of all the travel conversation about intent. So what we've filtered out is a lot of stuff to do with, for instance, COVID measures or not being allowed to travel, all that type of thing, and we just looked at intent. That intent line grew significantly across 2021. If I add in there what it was like in 2019, we saw a significant growth. So this first line, the pink sort of coloured line there, is mirroring the actual total travel conversation, and the grey line at the bottom there is mirroring the intent to travel. So we had a significant growth and something that continues to grow. Travel, obviously, is not just symbolic, it's also very optimistic. So when we looked at things like sentiment, which goes through natively in Arabic, we understood that 83% of that conversation is positive. People are very positive, even during times where you might not have seen positivity. People were still yearning for that need to travel, and that never left this market, and perhaps is one of the reasons why, when we start to look at why this market has perhaps rebounded more quickly than others around the world, is that it is enormously optimistic, but also it obviously represents that freedom. And sometimes those freedoms, the only freedoms that we get are the ones that we latch onto. Travel is also really important for our emotion. So when we started to look at the emotions, we found that obviously we had a lot of people happy to plan, happy to travel, happy and wanting to travel. But we also saw a lot of apprehension. Apprehension, not necessarily around, I guess this would be more along the lines of anxiety rather than, for instance, being nervous or fearful. We also saw a lot of anticipation coming in, as well as a lot of surprise. Excuse me. And then with the really negative things like anger, which is usually a reaction to everything that was happening, sadness, disgust and fear were quite low. In fact, fear was the lowest of the emotions that we measured across this period of time. And moving ahead, so in 2022, we're seeing an audience in the GCC across all these markets that's very happy, wanting to travel, anticipatory, and also looking forward to the surprise of travel. If you take those numbers alone, you've got over 50%, but we still have some apprehension out there and also some, I guess, sadness or fear, but they are minor. So we've had a macro look now, so now we're going to start to talk about the who and really look deep at who the travellers are and also talk about how the GCC traveller differs. A common misconception, I guess, looking at this market, which is no different to any other market, is that everybody who speaks the same language must act the same. And that's obviously patently untrue of any market, but also here. And this chart's really interesting. So what we also looked at in our study is personality and how people differ between the different markets and their personalities. This first chart is to look at exactly what we've got in the middle here. This yellow dot represents an average. So if we took an average of how the personalities of the people of the GCC might act or think or feel, that's the yellow dot. And then we've mapped each of these other markets as to how far away they are from the mean. So if we're just looking at a generic Arabic audience, it's the yellow dot. But then if we just start to look at the specifics in that audience, like the Saudis, for instance, we see they're further away. So they're a lot different to what our average is looking at. The UAE is obviously much closer to the average. Well, not obviously, it's much closer to the average. Qatar is about the same as the UAE, but they're at opposite ends of the scale, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to go into what all this means in a minute. Kuwait, we also see further away from the average, and then we get further and further out from Bahrain and Oman. So what we have is very different markets, very different sets of people with very different sets of expectations, and I'm going to take you through what those expectations are now. But first, we also, an overlooked insight perhaps if you use digital means of understanding people is dialect. Arabic language is obviously a very complicated language. It's also a language that when viewed from the outside is often looked at through the lens of modern standard Arabic. Modern standard Arabic is the formal Arabic, language of business, etc., but it's not what people talk. So in our studies, this looks at each country and all the different dialects that are spoken within the country. It helps us infer nationality, for example. So somebody speaking Egyptian dialect in Bahrain is likely to be an Egyptian, for example, etc. But what it enables us to do is to understand, firstly, the drivers, but then also get a deeper insight because we are typically looking at the nationals of each of these countries. And within that, just 70% of the conversation that happens online in Arabic happens in dialect. It doesn't happen in modern standard Arabic. It happens in dialect. And those languages, those dialects give us a really deep insight. Lots of tools and things like that that are on the market. Just look at standard Arabic. But once you start to dive into the actual dialects, we begin to understand who the traveller is, the likelihood of where they're from, and then obviously their intent. So we get a lot deeper, and it gives us a better understanding of the full picture. So onto the more juicy stuff now. Something new is the order of the moment. I think we all know this globally, but it's also true of this market. if we start to look at some of the commonalities, so what I'm going to do first is look at some of these commonalities between the markets, and then we're going to start to break them down market by market. So if you're sitting there thinking, is this guy up here for real telling me to market six different people, 6 different countries, all that sort of thing? No, what I'm saying is there are some commonalities that we can leverage. And if we start to look at personality, firstly we see a strong tendency towards everybody being open to new experiences, having an adventurous spirit, and high levels of creativity as well. So wanting to be active out in the world, the things that they see, the things that they experience is something that if it can involve a high amount of creativity, whether that's them being creative themselves or something that just appeals to their creative side, it's very important. Also, to communicate new experiences is very, very important. And obviously, the possibilities of what they're doing and that packed itinerary, so much to do, so little time, I need to share it. That's a GCC traveller in 5 of the 6 countries, but in Kuwait, we have an extra layer on top with a very, very strong score of extroversion. That extroversion means that they're a little bit more outgoing than the other markets. We're going to jump into this in a moment. But we also have a strong focus on family time and social bonding and culture, things like culture and experiences and people. So basically, we have a very open-minded set of people if we look at them together, and we're trying to make those recommendations, but we also got to play to that adventurous spirit and really try to appeal to that creative side of who these people are. Now, if we start to then break things down market by market, we get a bit of a different picture. If you're beginning to target countries within the GCC, and you've picked Saudi, for example, understanding who they are and how they are might get you a little bit further. So we're going to just quickly jump through all of those right now. In Bahrain, we have people who are creative, they adore nature and beauty, family-oriented, and they're also ready for new experiences. That's a very common theme coming through all of this. In Kuwait, we have an outgoing audience, enjoy shopping, might be of no surprise to people in the audience. They're very opinionated and happy to share those opinions. Obviously, seek comfort and luxury, as well as being willing to spend. And we saw that earlier. So one of the not coincidental findings, I guess, of what we found was that all of these facets mirror the intent to spend over a longer period of time. In Saudi, again, new experiences, being adventurous, again, some luxury coming in there, family-oriented, but also willing to pay a premium at the higher end of the scale to be pampered as well. Oman is a little bit more staid, like the country itself in many ways, in risk-averse, appreciate nature and beauty, and also rely on experiences. And then in the UAE, we have an audience that's much more emotionally driven. So that's about exploring really those feelings coming through and that emotion to come through. The experiences really matter here, and also to an extent are price cautious, meaning not necessarily, I'm not talking about everybody here, but if we want to appeal to the broader audience, we do have some price sensitivity. And Qatar, so we have obviously a very different set of expectations there, very high expectations, willing to pay for their comfort as well, and seek these experiences, but the expectations there are very different. So these are the key differences in the markets. Some of them are the same, some of them are different, as you can see, but these are all in the order of how they feel and the personalities of these travellers. So basically, once we start to look at these differences, and unfortunately I can't point this stuff out to you, but I'll give you a URL later where you can go to see some of these statistics. If we look at the personality model named the Big 5 personality model, otherwise known as OCEAN, if we start to look at the openness of an audience, so open to experiencing a variety of activities, so people who want that packed itinerary and that type of thing, we've got 5 in a cluster over here, and the average being the yellow triangle, and then we have Kuwait sitting much further away. So a single destination may appeal to them a bit more rather than, say, a packed itinerary or multi-stops on a country if they're visiting a city plus the country, that type of thing. If we look at the cooperativeness towards others, and what this generally means is the type of experience that someone's going to enjoy, not necessarily that they're cold and calculating, but more about in the travel context, about the types of activities. So are we there as a cluster of people? Are we there to enjoy an experience with a peer group or not? And we have a very big split here. It's almost split along geographical lines. So we have here the Oman, UAE and Saudi, very much looking towards peer groups, those types of things. And we have much more smaller units here when we talk about Qatar, Kuwait and Bahrain. Conscientiousness, so basically how well do they plan, and what importance is placed on planning. And we have those very strong results there for a Saudi traveller wanting to plan, probably looking at price, looking at multiple options, perhaps looking at multiple itineraries and multiple stops. Then we just have our cluster almost to the average here, so we don't see a huge conscientiousness score, but all of them score on that scale. So, sorry, if I'm explaining the scores here, which I didn't do at the start, above 0.5 is a strong feeling towards that, and below 0.5 is a lower feeling. So if they're lower in the scale, then they're lower with that facet. So everybody here is above 0.5, so that they really do like to plan, they do like to do research, and social media is a big part of that, obviously, within the Gulf. Then with extroversion, we're seeing this, they seek stimulation in the company of others. Again, we have a huge difference of all the different countries here, and this is where you begin to understand how different things are, and then also how much emotion is sensitive to the environment. We do have a difference there with, again, Oman, the outlier, and Kuwait, the outlier on the extreme end. So we have a picture of a GCC traveller, which if you take the average, works just as well, but also understanding the differences of each country becomes very important. Basically, how this works, I'm going to jump through this really quickly, but the Saudis are open to new ideas. They find familiarity, routine, boring as a takeaway. The UAE travellers are creative in their imagination, open to experiences and ideas. Kuwait, emotionally expressive, but also opinionated. Qatar is a bit more eccentric and individualistic and enjoy beauty and seek creative experiences. Bahrain, again, we're talking here about that they're very well planned and won't go too far away from what's familiar. And in Oman, are intrigued by new ideas, but mostly around beauty and nature. So we have a really different set of travellers here. And what we find is that new things amongst all the travellers are really important, even if it's familiar. So if it's somewhere that a GCC traveller has been coming to for many, many years, so a London, for example, finding something new within that has become increasingly important. That's a huge change that we've seen in the last year or two. If we look quickly now at the why, previously I think when we were talking about COVID, we were looking for victory, but now really it's about vacation. So why are they travelling? So why is the GCC traveller? It's for vacations. That has changed significantly from 2 years ago, where there was a much more even spread between work, medical treatments as well, visiting family and study. But in the post-pandemic time, we're seeing a stronger, well, much stronger, in order of 10x to vacations, and we'll talk about what those vacations are in a minute. And if we look at the demographics, it's roughly split how the split I showed you earlier. It would be as expected, other than perhaps work, which you may expect was the 31 to 42 age group. And then also, we do have a strong need for people to be doing study beyond what you would expect. So we're not looking here at 0 to 20, but when we talk about study here, we're talking about things like executive education, all that type of stuff that may be related to work, but isn't traveling for work. So we have this huge section of vacationers. That is getting younger. That is growing. The people looking to go for vacations are changing, and that's becoming a much younger audience. Why are they going for vacations? Well, it's mostly the beach and sea, and this is all in forecast terms. So we have also nature and mountains as second most. So we have natural beauty as basically 1 and 2, and then we start to look at things like culture and festivals, parks and attractions, and shopping, changing the order. It used to be a much higher attraction for, excuse me. Shopping used to be much higher, but culture and festivals and parks and attractions has changed. And then if we look at the demographics, we do have some interesting shifts amongst the demographics. We have the older, 31 to 40, strongly skewing towards nature. We have the younger audience looking for more culture and festivals. We have also shopping. So we start to see an emergence in demographics and the reasons for their vacations as well. So, and these statistics have changed substantially since before. Sorry. So where? That's the big question. And one takeaway from this, and I heard it also yesterday by the gentleman who opened the Congress, saying that domestic tourism is much stronger now in the GCC than it ever has been before. And that's primarily because of the investment governments have made and the diversification of things that have happened. So we start to see the top destinations actually being within the Gulf, and that's something that's really changed, but we're starting to see some growth happening through all of this. And so what are the top markets? Well, North America I'll leave because I think we probably would expect that, but the top European markets, and apologies you might not be able to read that, are UK, France, Germany, Italy, Switzerland and Greece. For the Middle East and Africa, we didn't get, aside from Egypt, there were no African destinations, so the UAE is a top destination within the market, particularly for Saudis and other market people as well. We also had Saudi, Kuwait, Egypt and Qatar obviously becoming strong with the World Cup this year. And then Asia, we have Turkey, China, Maldives, Thailand and Japan. These are the top 5 from each market, or 6 in Europe's case, and the top 2 in North America. They're the destinations that the GCC nationals want to visit. And some may be, I guess, surprising. We have a look, or if we take if we take a view of where that might be, the top destinations generally are Turkey, UK, France, Germany, and the US, aside from domestic market. Just some interesting demographic breakups here, and a big one of why Qatar has come in is obviously we've got the World Cup domestically, but it's also a much younger audience. So we can see there a huge difference in audience, but otherwise we see a fairly solid split, a fairly same split from these selected countries based on their demographics. So what are the implications of all of this? I've obviously taken you through a very helicopter view of what it is the GCC traveller is looking for, but there's some strategic, I guess, implications coming from personality analysis, but also destination analysis. So thinking about what's on offer, there really needs to be a clear way of helping the audience prioritize, or the potential traveller, prioritize and package as much as they can. We're not talking here about package holidays, but more about how things can be added to the purchasing process, how they can understand about multi stops on a destination, things like that, and making it as easy as possible for them. And also understand the why of the travel. So that's become a really important thing within the GCC Nationals, is how we can really get to why they're traveling. And if you start to begin to understand that, add-ons become much easier. You sit right. Positioning is so important. What works well in English doesn't necessarily work very well in Arabic and doesn't work very well in dialects. So does the consumer understand your offer? I took a walk around yesterday and noticed a really big difference, obviously, probably, as I say this out loud, between the Middle East hall and the international halls in terms of positioning and how that consumer might understand what it is that you are offering. And certain slogans and things like that might not necessarily translate very well. And so if there's a whole issue of traction and how you position. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to change a destination marketing position, but it you do need to sort of adapt that message for what market it is. And remember, if it's familiar or whether it's new, it needs to be exciting. So offering that excitement is super important to that traveller. Again, a generalisation, it does vary by market, but if you're looking at the 2 biggest markets of Saudi and UAE, this is a true statement. And we also need to think less about the rational and look more of the emotions. So a very common phrase I think I've heard a fair bit around this conference is relationships over transactions, but really looking to build that emotional bond with the traveller is just so important within this market, so that there is a feeling. And the reason for that is we need to really help them make a decision. So we really need to project an image over utility. What I mean by this is setting a tone through that emotion, not just the utility of a place. So not just come here for my shopping, isn't it great, or come here for this skyline or things like that, but really start to find the emotive elements of why somebody might leave this region and come and spend money where you are, or use your service. Also, don't underestimate community influence here, whether that's a social circle. I'm not talking just about social media. I'm talking about word of mouth. I'm talking about messy touch points, messy conversations, recommendations, We have to influence how these things work and how people can talk to each other. Last, we need to also lead a horse to water, so to speak. So it's a really once-in-a-generation opportunity to be emotional, connect with an emotional traveller who's really got a lot of pent-up demand, who's really looking at travel, who's really looking. This summer is obviously going to be a very big summer, but then moving forward from there, how can those lasting impressions be kept, and how can we really stick to something that can help us form a bond with the travellers, get them recommending and talking more about our destination. And I think a big thing about here is the need for travel. Sorry, previously we might have wanted to travel, and now it's almost a need. It's a primal need. It was taken away from us, I guess, taken away from everybody, but now that's come into sharper focus within the GCC. It's become the fabric of who they are. It always was with a summer travel, but now it's become much more important. So can you reciprocate? And lastly, try and talk their language. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's about communicating and understanding the nuances of different cultures and how different cultures can really, by communicating in a way that they can understand in an empathetic way, that you can really start to then make a difference to how they perceive you and then how you can connect with them. So as my microphone falls off, I think that's it. If you want to get in touch, you can go to, for some of the insights of this report, da.co/ATM.